Welcome back to the Sense of Life podcast. I'm Cody,
And I'm Joe.
and we've got a big one here. We read Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers, the classic adventure novel from, 1840 something.
1844.
1844. I'm not insane.
Yeah.
It is the classic kind of the beginning between like Dumas and Hugo. These were kind of the beginning of like romantic fiction at this time, the what's called the Romance period.
Right.
And it's heavily trotted water for like say film and TV and the stage. We just decided to focus on the novel, and I find myself. We were just talking about this before we started. I'm not entirely sure where to start, but I really enjoyed reading this. Because of the way we scheduled this out, I did have to cheat a bit and use the audiobook. So the haters can say I didn't actually read the book, but I did read a good portion of it, and I did understand it mostly.
I don't know if we're big enough to have haters yet.
Fair. So,
if at some point we become big enough for haters, I'm sure they will return to this and give you a thorough thrashing over it.
Yes, I will get canceled for reading half the book and listening to the other half.
Yeah.
Anyway,
did you use the Dan approach of listening at like 40 times speed?
No, I did jump to 1.2 times.
Okay.
I did. I was like, I'm curious. What would 2 times speed feel like? Could not understand it.
Yeah,
incoherent.
Yeah.
And even 1.5, incoherent. 1.2 was just coherent and just fast enough.
Yeah, the strange thing about audiobooks is that if you try and listen to an audiobook at like 1.5 times speed, and you grow accustomed to that, if you change it back to 1 time speed, it sounds like the narrator is drunk.
Sam Harris, yeah.
Sam Harris, yeah. That's one way to put it. But it's like they just sound so slow in comparison to the hours you've spent hearing their voice really fast. It would be like if you suddenly tuned into Ben Shapiro and he just was like, he's like, "Hey everybody, it's the Ben Shapiro show. I'm Ben Shapiro." It'd be like really fucking weird.
Like AI generated Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, exactly. That's always the problem with AI, is that they can't match the speed of Ben Shapiro, and they can't get the subtlety of Jordan Peterson's Canadian accent, so it just never sounds like him.
There was also an AI clip of like Red Scare going around, like Dasha and Anna, and the only thing it really captures is the, like, they call it vocal fry or whatever, but it doesn't capture like the rhythm of the way they talk or Dasha's like specific laugh that she has. It's like this like infectious cackle.
That's why Impressionists
can't do that.
Like that's actually why Impressionists are as good as they are, because they pick up specifically on the things that AI does not. They pick up on like particularities about like accent and the way things are said, and even like words that or expressions that the person commonly says. In order for an AI to catch that last part, you'd need like someone who's pretty familiar with the person and like their idiosyncrasies to kind of do it. We get the AI discussion talking about Three Musketeers.
I mean, we talked about AI last week. Speaking of AI, earlier today I was on Twitter and there was this fucking video going around of this like AI generated people like saying, I was raped by my mother and then I shot up a school or something. It was weird. And like they were all like just AI generated voices and like facial movements. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. And it was just like constantly happening. I would send it to you, but I almost don't want to.
Yeah, I think I'd rather not see any of that sort of
It
thing.
was horrible. I hated it. It was scarier than that fucking movie I saw last night, Talk to Me, which was really
Yeah.
good.
I'm at the point now where like if a video has a voice that is just like text to speech, I just close it. Like it doesn't even need to be like a creepy AI thing. It's just like if you're not
Yeah.
even going to get a real fucking person to say shit to me, like I'm not watching your shit.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Speaking of real people saying shit, Alexandre Dumas,
Yes.
back to the book. Although he did have a ghostwriter that he would bounce off ideas with. Like I think
Mhm.
the ghostwriter would help him come up with the like outline of things, and then he would kind of expand upon it. But overall, what did you think of the Three Musketeers?
Oh, I really enjoyed it. There was it's one of those novels where like you experience a lot of different emotions going through the story because it is like a, as you said, it was like the beginning of like the romance era of like literature.
Yeah,
And the like normally when I'm reading a book and if something funny happens, I might like smirk or
yeah,
let out like a sensible chuckle. But there were points in this where I was like I was laughing out loud because it was so funny.
yeah,
And uh just it was such a fun experience, the just seeing these characters go about their little adventure that was not quite so little.
yeah. I actually have an example of what you're talking about. This is at the top. Maybe we should give a little background before I start quoting.
Yeah, sure.
uh, so, um, for me, I really enjoyed the novel as well. We had talked about this off air, but I there were certain points, and I don't have the exact quote that I remember reading, but there was a point um, where I really started to pick up on the narration of this novel,
Yeah.
where there. So okay, how do I want to put this? Um, the narrator is, I think it's it's weird because I think it would still be third person limited. I think is what it's called. We talked about it before on like the Elmore Leonard episode we did,
Yeah.
and the Rio Murakami. Um, the but just the way the narrator describes the situation, it feels like it's an actual character seeing everything happen, and
Yeah.
it's like a Woody Allen movie at times.
Right. It's very much like, I mean, I guess this was the intent because it was made for a 18th or 19th century French audience, but it very
Yeah,
much the narration very much feels like a person of that era describing the events of this story that is supposed to take place like 200 years ago to a French audience of the 1800s. Um, and he's like adding his own asides to the reader.
yes, yeah.
Um, so I think
It
that is third person. Uh, what the fuck did you say? I can't remember.
limited. There's
Limited,
third
yeah,
because there's third person limited and there's third person omniscient, and it's kind of hard to tell the difference between the two sometimes. But I think the main difference is with limited, the narration kind of takes on the personality of the different characters that it's describing,
yeah,
at least as far as I can tell. And third
right,
person omniscient is just very dry, presenting what's happening. And
right,
something that this book has kind of unlocked in my understanding of like writing is that uh, take it back to something that Bret Easton Ellis would always say on his in his podcast and everything he talks about has to do with filmmaking. It's that the camera is a character in the story
hmm
of a film, and the way the information is presented, camera direction is very important for directing. Uh, exactly like what the camera is presenting and why. And I think a similar thing applies to a novel in that the narration, whatever point of view it is a character in and of itself.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well.
Yeah, with Bret Easton Ellis, he takes that literally because all of his narrators are first person,
Mhm.
and anyone that does first person does the same thing.
Yeah.
But even with like Ryu Murakami and Elmer Leonard and this novel I read by Jason Starr, they all use the third person limited. Even when and I remember I read off a quote from Audition that was like this, like the narrator will switch perspectives between characters, sometimes within sentences, and you can just feel like the rhythm of the sentences change. And I don't know exactly how this is accomplished prose wise. I guess that's kind of the figuring that out, is how to become a writer, and I think that just comes with practice and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it was really cool to kind of unlock that thing in my head and understand that. But now to kind of summarize what happens in this book before I start quoting from it. A fucking lot happens in this book.
Yeah, I guess to put it in like the most simple summary you can, it's a story about D'Artagnan, who is a young French fella. He's like 20, I think.
Yeah, 19
and
or 20. Yeah,
he's from like a more he's I can't remember the name of the province that he's from. Gascon, I think is the
Gascon.
yeah. I'm
so.
terrible with French pronunciation, so
yeah,
that's going to be fun.
The audiobook pronounced his name D'Artagnan or something.
Yeah.
No idea.
I'm not going to lean into the super like French pronunciation. I'm going to avoid saying character names that I can't pronounce as well. So instead of putting my ignorance on display.
And there are a lot of characters in this book.
Yeah. So he is a young man who has set off to Paris, and he wants to join the Musketeers, which are like a regiment under the service of the king. I think it's King Louis XIII in this story.
Yes. Yeah.
And he quickly befriends Three Musketeers, the Three Musketeers of the title, the titular Three Musketeers, Porthos, Athos, and Aramis. And the story is kind of their journey and about their loyalty to each other and their friendship as they kind of get sucked into this big like political scheme between like the king and the cardinal, and like a war between France and England, and just all this other crazy stuff is going on in the story that they get swept up in. And the crazy part is like between D'Artagnan arriving in Paris and like near the end of the book, it's only been like 7 or 8 months. It's like the most most crazy amount of shit has happened to this 20-year-old on his adventure to Paris that you could imagine.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
God, that's so much to kind of talk about. So I think there are a few different kind of antagonists.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main one would be Milady, who comes up at some point, is the kind of like, if you've read Atlas Shrugged, she's like the Lillian Reardon type.
Yeah, it's very interesting how she's not really like the focus of the antagonism for quite a bit of the book, and then
like she kind of comes out of nowhere.
She does, yeah. It's pretty great, but she was there at the beginning. As well.
She was always there, but like, and looking back on it, you see the kind of like underhanded things that she was doing, but it never quite rose to like, this is the big bad evil guy or whatever until the very end.
Right. Yeah,
And
the
the because like for the about the first half of the novel, I'd say even like the first three quarters, you think the big guy is Cardinal Richelieu,
yeah.
who also happens to be the bad guy in a great Ken Russell movie called The Devils. Takes place
Okay.
around the same time. It's
Yeah,
about
because he
this.
is a historical figure. A lot of the
Yes.
there are quite a few characters in this that are based off of real individuals, or just straight up are supposed to. They're not even are just based on them, but like just are that character.
Yeah, yeah. Dumas was almost writing a travel novel, like a travel log,
Yeah.
in the way that he puts this together, and he wanted to stick to historical accuracy as best as he could,
Mhm.
which is a little bit ironic when you read it, because in the edition I have from the translator Marcel Clements or whatever. He has his afterword and note to the reader talking about. We were just talking about this before we started. Um, there are some like historical inconsistencies and stuff. Some of it I think is for artistic reasons. Others it just seems like he bit off a little bit more than he could chew at times. But
Right.
like there's one point in like chapter 28 he D'Artagnan says it's said that D'Artagnan becomes a musketeer. The next chapter he's no longer a musketeer, and he's not a musketeer until chapter 47, and it's like kind of bizarre there. And then in uh chapter 59 is what happened in Portsmouth on August 23rd, 1628. And since the real Duke of Buckingham was assassinated on August 23rd, 1628, Dumas merely makes the 8-month jump in time without any explanation.
Yeah.
So there are like time jumps that happen for no reason.
Right.
Uh, and so all of this is true, but like when you're actually reading it, it doesn't really register unless you're looking for it.
Yeah, I actually didn't notice the thing you mentioned
Neither did I.
about him
Yeah.
being made a musketeer in like an early chapter and then he's not. Um, I don't know if that
Yeah,
was just
yeah.
something I completely missed that was in my translation because I have a different translation. Mine was done by uh, Jacques Leclerc.
Yeah.
Leclerc.
I didn't notice it either. It just kind of goes to show that specific. It's kind of like that Scorsese point of like, um, what was the word I used before we started? Continuity errors don't really matter if
Yeah,
the full story kind of comes together.
right.
And
Yeah, I mean that makes sense coming from Scorsese because he like a lot of his mob movies are that are based off of like real figures. Like
yeah,
the story is essentially like a decade and a half long,
hmm
but it doesn't really matter that it's a decade and a half long because
yeah,
you're telling it in like an hour and a half long movie or like a 2 hour long movie. So like
right, yeah,
things get condensed. They happen at the same time or closer together than they would have in real life. But uh, for the sake of the story, I don't think that particularly matters. Although it is neat that he still tried to stick to the historical accuracy, even if he bit off more than he could chew. Um,
yeah,
I was kind of thinking to myself earlier, like, man, if I knew a lot more about like French history from around that
yeah,
time,
same, yeah,
I would probably get a lot more out of this. Although, just strictly speaking, as a narrative and like uh, the actual characters that are presented in the story, you don't need to know French history. You can just
right, yeah.
experience and appreciate the story being told to you uh, as it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a great action story, a great adventure story. There's great comedy.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, the
fantastic. Like the way they portray the friendship between the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan is fantastic.
Yeah, like I'd say the first half of the novel is like the Musketeers like becoming a unit,
Hmm.
and then the second half is them coming to terms with like who the real enemy is or whatever.
Right.
Um, and there's the political intrigue, and there's also situations that come up. God, we're going to be jumping around a lot here because so much happens.
Yeah, it's a little tricky to organize impromptu.
Yeah,
You organize your thoughts on such a because it's like a 600, depending on your translation. Actually, it's like 600 or 700 pages.
Yeah, I think mine was like 640 something.
Yeah.
So if we're a little bit disorganized, that's part of the fun of the podcast where we talk off the cuff.
Yeah. Ideally, if you're listening to this, you've read the book already. Because
Yeah.
obviously we're discussing every aspect of it that we can think of without regard to
Yes.
spoilers.
But if you haven't, hopefully this is a good primer for it too. One thing I have picked up from at least reading this book and like other stuff, the best thing to do with a big book is just to like let it wash over you and don't try to worry about whether you understand what's happening or not. Just kind of like, okay, sure. D'Artagnan's from Gascon. Milady is the ex-wife of Athos, which I did not figure out until near the end.
Yeah.
And which is kind of important because there's a point when D'Artagnan impersonates a rival to spend a night with her, and she's Athos' ex-wife, and she also kind of sets off her villain origin story to go after them.
Yeah.
Anyway, the quote I was going to read earlier, again jumping back a bit. This is when they're picking out they're working on hiring their lackeys, and these lackeys are almost like comic relief characters.
Dude, I loved every scene with the lackeys. They're so funny.
They're like, but sire, why are we doing this? You know?
Yeah, I think I like how each one treats their lackey in a different way.
Yeah, they'll like beat them and shit.
Well, what I find the funniest is that Athos, who is like, I think he's the oldest of the group, and his character was like a well-off like gentleman who was quite wealthy, and he comes from like a background of being familiar with servants and stuff, so he has his lackey, and he literally just doesn't let him talk. They communicate with each other in like hand gestures and stuff, and just the idea of like just this guy going around with a lackey that does all this stuff for him, and he doesn't even let him talk. He just communicates with him in hand signals, and like there's certain points where they're like in a battle where like he's like, okay, you're permitted to speak. This is you're permitted to speak at this particular instance. it's just ridiculous.
And there's one pretty funny scene at the end where they're gonna like take care of Milady. They're gonna execute her.
Yeah,
and she tries to do her last like femme fatale wiles on one of the lackeys.
Yeah,
and like one of the musketeers sees that he's like faltered, and he's like, "All right, these two have been weakened by this woman. Put them in the back and take someone up in front."
Yeah.
So he I think it's Porthos is picking his lackey Planchet.
Planchet is D'Artagnan's lackey.
Right. See what I mean? Like, can't keep anything straight in this novel. He would so it goes like, he was a pickard whom the glorious musketeer had found on the Tournelle Bridge, making rings by spitting into the water. Porthos had decided that this occupation was proof of a reflective and contemplative nature, and had hired him immediately, without any other recommendation.
Insane.
He's just spitting in the water, and it's like, yeah,
this guy could be my lackey. I like this man. There's a particular part that this is just kind of me explaining the part that made me laugh out loud. There's a part where they are sent on a journey to go to England to deliver I think they were delivering a letter to the Duke of Buckingham. And this task was given to D'Artagnan, but he consults with Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and they decide, well, if we travel together, then if we're attacked by assassins on the road, you know, the letter will still have a chance to make it to the Duke, because if one of us goes, then the others can carry on and so forth.
Right.
And they kind of, as they're going down the road, it's like one by one they encounter some sort of scenario where one of them is separated from the others,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and D'Artagnan gets the task completed and is given 3 horses, or he's given a horse and 3 extra horses for his companions that he had to leave behind. And he comes back across to France and back to Paris and talks to the commander of the Musketeers, Mr. Treville, Monsieur
Mhm.
Treville, and he basically is like, "Oh, you should go check on what happened to Aramis, Porthos, and Athos to see, what has befallen them on the road." So
Right.
he kind of retraces his steps back to where he was going the first time, and runs into each of his companions, and each one of them has a very different kind of personality. Um,
Mhm.
like they kind of choose to emphasize something about each one of them. Like Aramis was going to be a priest, or
Yeah.
he was going to be involved with the church. Uh,
He's the trad calf of the
uh,
group. Yeah.
yeah, Porthos is like, he's not dumb, but he's the
Yeah.
least intelligent of of the Musketeers, and he's very
He's he,
vain. He's very
he's the he's the party face. Yeah.
yeah, he's very he's introduced with like this like gold like article of clothing at some point,
Yeah.
and it turns out it's gold plated. It's not like gold, but uh it's just for the sake of appearances. Like he's very much a fashionable kind of guy. And uh Athos is the oldest, and he also like drinks a lot. Um or
Right.
when he drinks a lot, I should say. And
Yeah. Yeah.
he's coming across his companions, and the part that made me laugh was when he found Aramis, and Aramis is talking to these 2 church folk about like, after this experience, I think he took a shot in the shoulder from like a musket ball or something. So he
Right.
was wounded, and he's like in this bed, and he's talking to these 2 guys about how he's going to write a thesis in Latin, and
Yeah.
give up his life as a musketeer and join the church.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh, it's Friday, so I can't eat any meat. So if you'd like to join me for dinner,
Yeah.
D'Artagnan, I'm eating." And it's like he's eating like spinach and some other like vegetables and stuff.
I
And
think I DM'd you about this scene.
and and D'Artagnan has a note in his pocket from some lady that is romantically involved with Aramis, and D'Artagnan kind of dangles this note cheekily, um, not literally, but like kind of, he's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, I if you are going to join the church, I guess I won't need to give you this letter from this lady." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And he gives him the note, and he like snatches it from his hand, and he reads it, and his lackey shows up with all the vegetables, and he's basically like, "Get the fuck out of here! Get all that shit out of here! Get me some meat and some fucking wine." he's like he's like back on the musketeer grind set, and immediately chucks his spinach out the window. It's the funniest
Yeah.
thing. I was losing my mind reading it.
Yeah. That I had sent you a message, said, "Man, Dumas really knows how fucking annoying someone can be when they first start a new ideology." Like, he
Ugh.
like just became like an annoying trad cat,
It
and then he
was
just stops when
yeah, he stopped immediately.
it's
That
great.
scene was great. And when he goes to find Porthos, um he because he's vain, and he very much cares about how others perceive him. He it's something to do with like the innkeep of the place, is he's keeping him in like the best room of the inn,
Yeah.
and he he's wounded, but he's trying to act as if he's not that hurt, and the innkeep basically tells D'Artagnan everything about what has happened with Porthos, but then when D'Artagnan goes in to talk to him, he basically just says like, "Oh yeah, the innkeep told me nothing," and then he basically just plays off of his own vanity to get him to join him again on their journey, and then they meet up with Athos, and he was attacked by I think he was the last one to get attacked on the road, and the innkeep of that place was informed that some coin counterfeiters were going to be coming by, and that like he gave them he was given a note with a description of who these coin counterfeiters were, and it was just the cardinal setting up a plot to try and hinder their plan to get to England. And Athos like takes out 2 pistols and like shoots he shoots the people that try to arrest him, and then he gets like locked in the cellar of the inn with his lackey. I think his was Grimaud.
I think so.
And they're like stuck down in the cellar, and they end up just drinking a bunch of the booze and eating like a bunch of the food that was hanging up down there. And like when he initially was chased down into the cellar, he knocked over like a giant pile of wine, so like all the bottles were smashed. Either that or he actually drank them all and he just smashed the bottles and said that they got smashed when he threw down there. Like I couldn't quite tell exactly what he meant, but I'm fairly certain he did drink quite a bit of it, because he was hammered when D'Artagnan found him. And as he meets each of his companions, he gives each one of them this fancy horse with like this really immaculate, intricate saddle on them. And they're like expensive English horses that they were given by like a duke. And so like there's a point where all 4 of them meet up once again. Or I guess before they meet up again, Athos had no money, and there were these 2 Englishmen at the inn, and he had bet all of the horse that he had just been given. He bet the saddles. He bet D'Artagnan's ring that had a diamond on it that he got from the Queen. He was betting all this shit that wasn't his in like gambling against these Englishmen. And the scene plays out like a fucking like the funniest comedy ever. He's like, oh, I bet the horse and then I lost it. And he's like, oh my god, Athos. And he's like, and I bet the saddles because I wanted to win the horse back. He's like, yes, and I lost the saddles as well. So, oh no. And he's just like, I bet your diamond ring, and he's like, but Athos, that was given to me by the Queen. And he's like, and I won the saddles back. And he's like, oh, thank goodness. And he's just like, and then I lost them again.
It's like that one scene in the Mel Brooks movie, Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Yeah,
where the castle's gone and Robin Hood comes back to his like blind Plinky or whatever his name is, and he's like, what happened to my parents? They died of the plague. And what happened to my dog Pogo? Ran over by a carriage. My cat? Wait, no, my goldfish Goldie eaten by the cat. My cat choked on the goldfish.
But it was like in the end they got the saddles back, but they couldn't win the horses back, I think was what happened.
Yeah.
And
something like that. Yeah.
So then Athos and D'Artagnan go back down the road back towards Paris, and they meet up with Porthos and Aramis, and I think they were literally just walking because they didn't have the horses. And Planchet and Grimaud had the saddles because they won the saddles back, and they were carrying the saddles on their heads
Yeah.
Which is explicitly stated in the book that they were carrying the saddles on their heads. That I just imagine that the lackeys are short, like they're little silly characters in my mind.
The fucking Oompa Loompas.
Yeah. So they're just these little guys carrying these saddles on their heads, and they meet up with Porthos and Aramis, and it's revealed. I can't remember the exact details of what happened with Aramis and Porthos, but they also sold their horses as well.
Right.
So it's like none of them had the fancy horses they were gifted by the Duke. And they all just kind of laugh about it together, and it's revealed like individually, like, oh, but at least we all kept the saddles. Like they all understood independently the value of the saddles, so they never got rid of those. It was just such a, and then they like get together. They're like, all right, boys, we need money. we need money. We need to earn this amount of money, and
they're constantly like out of money, and one of them has a gambling problem.
Yeah. It's so good. And the best part is like this scene where they're trying to get money together. D'Artagnan is wearing this ring with a diamond on it from the Queen, and I think one of them says like, "Oh, come now, D'Artagnan, you wouldn't want to be walking around with that fancy ring while all your friends look poor in comparison."
Yeah.
So they're like trying to convince him to sell the ring because they need money for their adventure, and it's. The like different personalities of the Musketeers interacting with each other is easily like, obviously they're the protagonists, so you would expect it to be the highlight of the story, but for me it was just it was so good.
Yeah, the comedy is great, and you touched on it a bit, but Dumas really has a great way of writing action.
Yes,
and I've got a highlighted quote here. It's a bit long, so bear with me here.
All right.
But D'Artagnan had served his apprenticeship the day before. Sharpened by his victory, full of hopes of future favor, he was resolved not to recoil by even one step. The two swords were crossed close to the hilt, and since D'Artagnan stood firm, it was his adversary who retreated. D'Artagnan seized the opportunity given by this moment to free his weapon, lunge, and touch his adversary on the shoulder. D'Artagnan immediately stepped back and raised his sword, but Bernajoux cried out that it was nothing, and rushing forward, spitted himself on D'Artagnan's sword, because he did not fall or to declare himself conquered, but only broke away toward Monsieur de la Tremelle's residence, where one of his relatives was a member of the household. D'Artagnan did not know how seriously wounded his adversary was. He continued to press him, and would undoubtedly have soon completed his work with a third thrust. However, two of the guardsman's friends, who had seen him leave after exchanging some words with D'Artagnan, rushed out of the court, swords in hand, and fell upon the victor. But Athos, Porthos, and Aramis quickly appeared in their turn and drove the two guardsmen back just as they were attacking their young companion. Bernajoux finally fell, and since the guardsmen were only 2 against 4, they began to call out, "To the rescue!" At these cries, all who were in the La Tremelle house rushed out and fell upon the 4 companions, who were themselves now shouting, "Musketeers, to the rescue!" And at the time that I was reading this part of the novel, I was rewatching Teen Titans.
Okay.
And I basically wrote next to this, "Teen Titans, go!" And it kind of it had that vibe to me.
Yeah. I do enjoy how they describe how Dumas describes like the different duels and the fights.
Yes, yeah.
And there's
it's
one
very
particular
cinematic.
It is, yeah. You get a very good idea of the actual scenery of the fight, the way he describes it. It's very well written.
There's
the scene there's a scene near the end where they're trying to discuss their plans, but there's like spies for the cardinal all around, and spies of Milady as well. So they basically come up with this plan. There's like these. I think there was a Swiss guy, a dragoon, and some other fucking person. I don't know. I think he was German or something. And they were like different mercenaries from around Europe that were working with the French military during their campaign, and they basically make a wager with them that like, oh, I bet we can go to the bastion over there and hold it for an hour and have our lunch there and not lose it to the rebel forces, because like the whole war that's being fought is like this rebellious kind of there's like these French rebels that are fighting against the king's forces that are also backed by the English, to my understanding.
Right.
So they go to this bastion and they're using it. They use the bet of holding it against the enemy as an excuse to have a spot where no one would be able to overhear them discussing their plans, which is a pretty great like kind of concept for a scene. The four musketeers that, I guess the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan, because he doesn't become a musketeer until after the Bastion event.
Right.
All four of them come up with like some pretty ingenious plans to to acquire their goals, or to achieve their goals, and they're like having their lunch at this bastion, and there's like a bunch of dead guys that were already in there, and they like take their muskets, so they have like a bunch of different muskets and like 100 rounds of ammunition, and they basically just have their lackeys sitting by reloading the muskets for them, so that when enemies do attack, they can just, constantly fire at them. And they get attacked by like a first small band of enemies, and like they quickly retreat, and then they get attacked by like 20 of them, and the way he describes it, it's like they're shooting, they just keep shooting, and every time like 3 shots are fired, at least two of the approaching enemy fall, but they don't slow down. And there's like this wall at the bastion that is just extremely weakened, and I think he notes that it's a miracle that it's even standing up straight. And the like, as the enemy forces get close to the wall, the musketeers just push it over and just crush them all. So like in the end, they killed like 20 people, and they go back to the camp and they're congratulated by everybody because of this little wager that they did about holding the bastion 4 against like 22, I think, is how many they killed. And the way they escape is they just leave a bunch of dead bodies with like muskets in their hands leaned up against the wall as they make their escape out the back. As the final force of enemies like rush the bastion.
Right. Yeah.
That was a great little battle scene. I really liked that.
Yeah. Again, back in the like the note to the reader or whatever, the afterword in this, Marcel Clements, the translator, he talks about how cinematic the action is written, and it's like it's no-brainer why this was adapted to so many movies and still continuing to be adapted today. I think there's a French duology that's coming out now.
Okay.
I don't know if it'll reach the States or not, but it's slated for this year. That at times it reads like a script, basically. And it's very visual. It plays like a movie in your head, which is why it's so fun to read. And the one quote that I read made me think of that Zack Snyder talking about how Seven Samurai is like the ultimate team up movie, where I think the Three Musketeers might be like the ultimate team up story, where like I mean I was finding parallels to Teen Titans in that one scene. So like just the whole like concept of like all of the guys coming together for the first time and having to fight a bunch of people at the same time and work together. Just the way it describes all of those, like the plans that they have to do, or like in this specific case, there was like and then this guy comes out and they have to deal with that, and then this guy comes out, and it's kind of like that Paul Schrader quote about like when you're getting to a scene and you're like telling the guy you're wanting to make the movie with about the scene, and he starts getting bored. Good way to stop him from getting bored is say, and then a guy with a gun comes in, and he does that in this book. Like there's like a scene where you're like, what's happening here? 2 guards show up right there. And you're like, okay, yeah, great.
Yeah, there are like several ambushes on the road that happen where it's just like out of nowhere you're like, oh, there's a battle happening now. Okay, that's cool.
It's a very like D&D Final Fantasy kind of shit. Like random encounters just happen.
He wrote random encounters into the story. That's awesome. Yeah. It's. I mean, it is like the definitive, like, adventure story of friends, kind of. The ultimate team up story, as you put it. I mean, the phrase, you know, one for all and all for one and one for all, like that comes from this. It's like that is like the phrase you think about when it's like, you know, a group of guys teaming up for an adventure kind of thing. It's like it definitely you can see why it became so popular, because it was just that good.
Yeah, and it was serialized, so the people that were reading it at the time would have like read it week to week or like month to month on like at the local magazines at the time. And Dumas was struggling financially throughout his life. He died penniless, unfortunately. But he was, I think he lived kind of an extravagant life, so like a lot of him is in these characters. So he was always out of money and always he was a very prolific writer though. So like he had to like churn shit out. And
he was writing the scene of the Musketeers sitting together going, all right, we need to get some money together. And he's like, they're just like me for real.
And so, like a lot of those like serialized novels, they would have come out like weekly and you'd read like the chapter. And I think that's just a cool way to experience a novel. I know there are a few people that are still doing that, like with Substack and stuff. It's a cool concept. And what's next? Oh yeah, we talked about comedy, we talked about action, and this is a romantic novel, so there's a bit of romance and like eroticism and sex in it, even though there's not really an explicit sex scene, but you can feel the kind of tension going on.
Right. You get the implications.
Yeah, I've got one last quote here, and this will be the last time I pull out quotes.
All right.
Let me find it here. Actually, it's two more.
2 quotes. Okay.
Technically 3, but 2 go together. So at this point, what's going on here? So D'Artagnan has followed Madame Bonacieux to her corridor, and this is Madame Bonacieux.
Oh, Bonacieux.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Constance's husband. He initially enlists D'Artagnan to help him rescue his wife from the Cardinal's guards. Actually, no, hang on. Constance, the Queen's seamstress and confidant. After D'Artagnan rescues her from the Cardinal's guard, he immediately falls in love with her. She appreciates his protection, but the relationship is never fully consummated. I'm trying to remember exactly what I was thinking when I highlighted this. What was it? Just kind of D'Artagnan's like lust and unrequited love happening here. At every step of the way, and in proportion as the corridors became more deserted, he wanted to stop the young woman, hold her, gaze upon her, even if only for a minute. But every time he tried, she slipped between his hands, and every time he began to speak to her, she put a finger on her mouth with a little imperious gesture full of grace, reminding him that he was under the command of a power he must blindly obey, one that forbade him to make even the slightest complaint. And then later on, she's giving him these commands basically to get out. And the chapter ends with, he obeyed like a child without the least resistance or objection, which proved that he was really in love. And so he's a young guy, so he's kind of viewing the woman as simultaneously a kind of weird mother figure. If we want to get Freudian about it,
you can't keep getting away with it. Yeah. You can't keep getting away with it.
Yeah, so the novel is French, so remember that.
Yeah.
And later on the next chapter, um, he's talking to Monsieur Bonacieux, Constance's husband, um, and of course, Bonacieux doesn't know that D'Artagnan loves his wife. Besides, how is it possible not to feel a certain amount of benevolence toward a husband whose pretty wife has arranged a rendezvous with you that same evening at St. Cloud, opposite D'Estrici's house? D'Artagnan approached him with the friendliest manner he could assume. This guy's wife is hot. I'll be nice to him.
Yeah.
So it's got everything. It's got romance. It's got action. It's got political intrigue. It's got weird scenes. There's one scene that we mentioned earlier with Milady, where D'Artagnan impersonates. I think it's Rochefort that he impersonates. Am I remembering that correctly? He impersonates her to try to sleep with her. And then she figures out that he's lying, kicks him out, and that's why she exacts revenge on him.
Right.
At some point,
I think the scene where he met up with her pretending to be the other guy, was it was dark or something, because she had met D'Artagnan before, so he was pretending to be this guy, and she gave him, I think she gave him was it a ring? She gave him something, and then he used this information later on when she wanted him to kill this guy that she thought he was the guy he was impersonating. She thought was blowing her off, basically. And she's she's talking to D'Artagnan, and she's like, "You must kill him," and he's like, "Oh yes, I overheard him at the inn talking about how you gave him such and such a ring," and she's like, "Oh, that scoundrel."
And at some point, this servant of Milady, Kitty, comes into the picture, and
straight up just named Kitty, by the way.
Yeah, that's her name, Kitty, Kitty. No other name.
Dumas was writing about those Discord kittens, fucking 200 years ago, dude.
So D'Artagnan becomes a Discord mod, and
yeah.
And it's a servant of Milady, but she really likes D'Artagnan, but D'Artagnan really likes Milady, and D'Artagnan really likes Constance, and D'Artagnan doesn't know what he wants because he's young. It's so cool. It's a great book. I mean, we've almost we're at 53 minutes now.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck, that went fast.
Yeah, it's a lot of the stuff that happens later in the book I also found particularly interesting. There's a scene where, or I guess the setup for it is this Milady character. She's been sent back to England by the Cardinal to assassinate the Duke of Buckingham so that he can't come back to France during this war that they're fighting. And D'Artagnan at the same time has written a letter to her brother-in-law, who was a guy that he had dueled earlier in the book but spared his life, and then in sparing that guy's life they became bros, basically. And he's like, yeah, your sister-in-law, she's a fucking skank. With the whole thing with her character is she has this brand on her shoulder. And
the Scarlet Letter kind of thing.
So he's like, yeah, she's got this brand on her shoulder, and she's working with the Cardinal and doing all this other evil shit, these nefarious deeds. So and then her brother-in-law detains her at this castle. And there are 4 chapters where it's basically just her, the brother-in-law, and the guard that is guarding her room are the only real characters for those 4 chapters. And each chapter is just called the first day of her confinement, the second day, the third day. and at least that's what they were called in my translation. I don't know how they translated the chapter titles.
Yeah. First day of
yours.
captivity, second day, third day. Yeah.
And it's literally just her using her fucking manipulative ways to try and trick
Yeah.
the guard that is guarding her her confinement to basically free her, and she like gaslights him into thinking that she is also a Puritan like he is, and
Mm-hmm.
she tells this like fantastical tale about how the Duke of Buckingham like like fucking roofied her drink or whatever and was like keeping her in a fucking prison and all this other stuff, and he just
She's Me Too's a guy randomly.
yeah, she Me Too's a guy partway through the book. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then John Felton believes this, and he's like,
Yeah.
The funny thing is that the brother-in-law literally, he's like, this is one of my best men, and he is like a son to me, and I'm like a father to him. And he's like, you must guard this woman, for she is evil, and she will do anything in her power to try and trick you. And then he immediately gets tricked. It's like, dude, what are you doing? And even she was like, oh, she calls him like a religious idiot. Like, she's like, oh, this moron. Like,
Yeah.
she just hates him. There's a point in there where she literally says something like, she's like, oh, he is hardly a man. And then she compares him to D'Artagnan, who she considers to be like a real man. And it's like, dude, she's a real hater in that she still recognizes that D'Artagnan is a man. Like he's an honorable man of
and she hates him for it. Literally hatred of the good for being the good.
Right, but she also hates the weak, pathetic Puritan guy too. Like she just hates everything.
Yeah, she's like a total nihilist.
Right. And
like it's these like conniving Catholics using complete nihilistic witches to accomplish their goals.
Nihilistic witches. That's basically it, yeah. And so like she escapes thanks to this guy, and then that guy kills the Duke of Buckingham, and that's actually based on a real guy. John Felton was a real guy that killed the first Duke of Buckingham.
Right, yeah.
In real life. So that was like a historical event being portrayed in the story, as it does a few times. Mm-hmm. But I think probably like the highlight of the end of the story, you know, as it was written to be, was when they catch her, and it's like Athos is like peeking through the window at her, and like thunder, there's thunder, and it just illuminates his face in the window, and she just shrieks.
Yeah.
And then she tries to run away, and D'Artagnan's on the other side of the door, on the other side of the room, and Athos like smashes through the window like fucking Batman.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And then
you could just like hear the sound of those like bats coming up and like the Danny Elfman theme going.
We'll say if Zack Snyder directed the Three Musketeers, the glass would be breaking in slow motion.
Yeah.
And it would be very epic. But they like capture her, and D'Artagnan is about to kill her because initially when they were trying to find her, she ends up at the same place that the woman that D'Artagnan loves, Miss Bonacieux, as her name is pronounced, I think. She's also there, and Milady fucking is like just on a whim decides to poison her as she runs away. Like she's trying to escape from D'Artagnan and the other Musketeers, and at the end she's just like, fuck it, I'll poison you before I leave, and then she runs away. And then the woman that D'Artagnan loves like dies in his arms because she was poisoned by this bitch.
Yeah.
And so they set out to capture her, and the four Musketeers and the and her brother-in-law are all there, and they all pronounce their judgments against her and bear witness to the others' claims of her crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And she's kind of just sitting there like completely just defeated, and they're like, they all agree that her sentence is to be death. Um, and there's like this other dude there too who was like they call him like the man in the red cloak, and he was like in her backstory she was married to Athos years prior, but she had the brand on her and he found it, so he was like he had her fucking executed or something, but she got away. And the executioner that was supposed to kill her, he was there,
right?
And they just fucking cut her head off. Like, I don't know what to say. He like takes his cloak off and puts her body in the cloak with her head too.
First they like drag her out to like sea, like they're taking her out on like the beach into the ocean or whatever.
Yeah,
and they're gonna kill her there, and it's like a soap opera scene of like a woman like going into the water to let it like wash over her, and so she can drown. It's bizarre.
It was great because then once they actually kill her, the story's kind of over at that point.
Yeah.
You would think the way that it's set up with like the political intrigue with the cardinal and stuff that like, oh, there's going to be a big confrontation with him, but there really isn't, because his means of operating politically is through scheming behind the scenes. Yeah. So once they had taken out his agent of carrying out his plans, he kind of he's like, oh, okay, here's a letter that will get you the position of a lieutenant in the Musketeers. Like he basically just bribes them at the end, and he destroys a letter they had incriminating him anyway, so it's not like they could do anything. So he kind of just like, he's like, oh, you've outsmarted me, and he weirdly respects them too. Like there are several scenes from his perspective where he's just like, oh, these four are very very intelligent. He like realizes their plans, and he's like following through with their schemes, and he's just like, there's literally a point where he says, I must have them. Like he wants them to be, he respects the grind, as it were. He wants them to be working for him.
He's like Palpatine at the end of like Return of the Jedi, where he's like, so be it, Jedi.
He wants 4 new apprentices, basically.
Yeah. I mean, he even does the Palpatine thing of like, there was that one YouTube video essay guy that talked about Palpatine being the one guy that declares Luke a Jedi. Richelieu is the one guy that declares D'Artagnan a Musketeer for real.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting connection there that I just made.
Yeah, he does. It's because of him that D'Artagnan becomes a Musketeer, and it's because of his letter of recommendation that he becomes a lieutenant in the Musketeers, despite being their adversary throughout the story. It's like a game of chess, basically.
It's sometimes you got to dance with the devil to get out of hell, kind of thing.
Yeah, but yeah, they kill Milady. Her head is chopped off by this executioner guy, and the executioner like takes off his red cloak and wraps her body in it and her head, and then he like just gets in a boat and he's like, all right, see you later, and then he goes out in the water and just dumps her body in the water.
And there's one part where one of the Musketeers gives him money for a fee, and then he's like, okay, thanks. To show this is not for money, he throws the money in the water as well. It was like, okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
It's so good. There's I guess another interesting point that happens in the book is that, as I mentioned earlier, they keep trying to convince D'Artagnan to sell the ring that he got from the Queen, and it's like, it's very obviously a ring from the Queen. So like he keeps wearing it, and he keeps being told to like turn the gem inward so that people don't see him walking around with like this super extravagant ring, but he keeps not doing that. And like the cardinal and other people are noticing this ring that he has, and they know he got it from the Queen, so he's just exposing himself constantly, and they're constantly in need of money, and yet he keeps this ring. And then near the end of the book, he eventually does sell it. And I think the reasoning behind selling it, Athos says something. This is like the argument that convinces D'Artagnan to sell it. He says,
Mhm.
like, oh, think if you were to use the ring and the funds we get from it, not only to save us, but to save the Duke of Buckingham as well. Using this trinket from the Queen to save ourselves and the man she loves, because that's another like background plot is that the Queen of France loves this Duke of Buckingham,
Mhm.
uh, and they kind of use the funds from that to I think they use it to, or at least some of it to pay the messenger to try and stop Milady from killing the Duke.
Right.
Um, I just found it neat that there was like a point where he finally relinquishes the ring, but uses the money for it specifically to try and save the Duke of Buckingham and his friends.
Mhm. Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a lot that could be said about it, but overall, I mean, I don't really want to do like a full plot synopsis. That would just get kind of boring and kind of
Yeah.
impossible. You just you got to read it. I mean, even listen to it. It's just a really great classic adventure story. I think a lot of like with schools when they try to present classic literature like this, I think they kind of do a disservice. It's similar to how people try to present classic cinema,
Mhm.
um, where they try to present it as this like highfalutin thing, rather than it's like an action movie, and
Right.
it's like a soap opera kind of.
Right. This
Um,
this is classic literature, but as you said, it was like a serialized, like weekly or
yeah,
monthly thing that was released. It was pop culture for its time. Like it's
yeah.
not. It wasn't
This
like this high above everybody high art that only the greatest of intellectuals could appreciate. It was
and
it was
even
something that everyone enjoyed.
and even within its own pages, it has like inconsistencies. It's not perfect.
Hmm.
Like but it the way that it comes together is just like a classic action romance fantasy tale, like based in history. And Dumas was a very prolific writer. Wrote a lot of serialized novels, wrote a lot of adventure novels, wrote
He
some
was a playwright
fantasy,
too.
a playwright, wrote some Christian history. There's the D'Artagnan romances, which is the Three Musketeers, 20 years after, and the Vict Comte de Brillion, sometimes called 10 years later. Um, and it was, when published in English, it was usually split into three parts. Between Two Kings, Louis de la Valliere, and the most well known form, The Man in the Iron Mask, which is the last part. So, and then there's the Count of Monte Cristo, which I think some of the Three Musketeer characters appear at some point, but they're not like main characters. Um, yeah, so he was one
The
of those
Dumas
guys that.
cinematic universe going on right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. He also wrote a vampire tale, apparently.
Oh,
The
that's pretty
Pale
cool.
Lady. He wrote The Wolf Leader, which is one of the first werewolf novels.
Mm,
So I mean, he had his hand in basically everything. Like he,
yeah.
the Marie Antoinette romances. Jesus Christ, what? Wrote some Robin Hood. Um,
Yeah, he was just out there grinding.
he was just pumping shit out, man.
Yeah.
Uh, so he was very much like a kind of like a populist writer in that sense, and he also was of African descent as well,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting.
Which is a
Uh,
plot point in Django Unchained.
yeah, yeah,
It is. There's the Monsieur Candy that runs the slave plantation. He named one of his slaves D'Artagnan, and uh there's like kind of a moment later in the book, or in the movie, when
yeah.
Christoph Waltz's character uh kind of just shows to Candy that he's just a complete dumbass that doesn't even know what he's talking about when he points out to him that Alexandre Dumas was black.
Yeah. It says on here again. I'm just Wikipedia surfing here, but he would meet up with Victor Hugo, Charles Baudelaire, Gerard de Nerval, Eugene Delacroix. God, I'm terrible. Honoré de Balzac, and they would take hashish at a hotel and just talk about shit. Dream blunt rotation, one might say.
That is insane.
But yeah, I definitely recommend it. I want to read some more Dumas. I don't know if we'll read it for the pod. We might. I mean, we might get to it. I definitely want to watch more of the movies. I've only seen one of them. I think.
I'd be down to read The Count of Monte Cristo and maybe pair it with like a film adaptation of it.
Yeah.
That'd be cool sometime.
No
set plan for that?
Yeah, no set plan for that. And yeah, so that'll kind of reach us into the kind of housekeeping portion of this episode.
Yeah.
First, as far as books go, we're not going to be setting dates for books anymore. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, there was a bit of cramming at the end, a little procrastination, followed by the inevitable cramming to get the book done. Yep. So I think what we're going to do going forward, what we're going to do going forward is we'll stick mainly to movies and TV shows, with the plan of reading books in the background. And once we finish them and we convene and we have finished whatever particular book that is. Once we've both finished it, the next week after that is going to be the week we cover that book. So there's no rush at that point.
Yeah, and with a lot of those episodes, we'll be probably pairing it with the movie adaptation if there is one.
Yeah.
And so those would be fun episodes.
Yeah, that would be what the
same thing with video games.
Yeah, video games as well, because they can take quite a while to beat, especially modern video games.
Or JRPGs.
Yeah, JRPGs. Oh, Jesus.
Which are just like fucking Victorian romances in and of themselves. And what was the other thing? Oh, yeah. This will be the last episode that is on YouTube only. I think, I don't think. We are going to move over to podcast platforms. I'm going to set up either Libsyn or something else. Maybe we'll put out either a post on Twitter or maybe just like have Joe do like an update video or something of when all of that stuff is set up, where to go, where that's all going to be. I still got to figure it out, and I still need Joe to get the audios from all these episodes up on our drive so I can handle that.
That's right.
And I think Joe is going to focus the channel more on kind of gaming stuff, maybe more like video content going on there. The audio stuff will be where audio stuff is. I think we'll definitely keep like the Battlefront episode on the channel, I think, because it has a video component. So that I'll stay up, and like whatever you want to do with these first 15, 16 episodes, whether you want to unlist them or keep them up, whatever. Regardless,
what I might do is I might make a playlist, like a YouTube playlist for the channel, and just put them all in that. I think if you make videos unlisted but keep them in a playlist, people can still access them, but they won't show up in like the main channel feed. I need to work on exactly what I'm going to do with that, but we'll see if that even works.
Should be by the next episode. We'll have all that figured out. Might take me until the episode after that, but to have it all in the same place.
Speaking of the next episode, we actually do know what we're going to do next week.
Yes, for once.
We this was literally just a plan we came up with yesterday. I was looking around on Tubi, and I saw a Kiyoshi Kurosawa film on there called Creepy. And I had the only Kiyoshi Kurosawa film I've watched is Pulse, which was pretty good. And the other movie he's mainly known for is, I think it came out in 1996, if I remember correctly, and it's called Cure.
Yeah. 96, I think.
Was it 96? I don't have the Wikipedia up, so I'm just guessing.
It was part of the big J horror boom of the 90s.
Yeah, so we're going to do Cure and Creepy, two Kiyoshi Kurosawa films next week.
Yeah. So I think that'll wrap it up for this week's episode. Read the Three Musketeers and read more books. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks.
Yep. Tune in next time.